Hey everyone, it's Blake, and welcome in to the 411 on Wrestling Podcast. On today's episode of the podcast, we welcome back our friend Andy Perez, who is the host of Dissecting Dynamite on 411's YouTube channel, and he's got a lot of other great stuff going on the 411 YouTube channel with some of the recent videos he's put together and a very exciting mini documentary series he started as well. And so we go into a bit of that and discuss The Undertaker's final farewell at Survivor Series, what we thought of it, what were some of the things that stood out from it, and just the biggest takeaways overall, and kind of looking back at The Undertaker's career, which Andy did for a video that he put together for on the YouTube channel. So we talked a lot about that, but the biggest part was talking about the upcoming Jon Moxley versus Kenny Omega match for the AEW World Title, which will take place on Wednesday night's episode of AEW Dynamite. We talked a lot about the build to it, the possible scenarios we could see in that match, the whole winter is coming tagline, and what that could possibly mean for this particular show. So talked a lot about just what we could see in what is obviously one of the biggest matches we've seen in AEW thus far in terms of on AEW Dynamite. The biggest match, most likely, in terms of how they have hyped this thing up and what the expectations are. Could there be a title change? Could there be an invasion of sorts? Lots of rumors, lots of speculation out there. So we talked a lot about that, as well as an upcoming documentary that Andy has put together on Kurt Angle and kind of what went into that, and really just the storyline, the idea behind it, and lots of really great stuff there. So always a fun conversation with Andy. So let's go ahead and jump into the conversation with 411's Andy Perez. All right, as promised, our guest today is the one and only Andy Perez, introducing him as the one and only now because he is the one and only, the host of Dissecting Dynamite, and he's been doing a lot of great stuff, a lot of great video-related stuff that we're going to talk more about here on the podcast. Andy, hope you had a great Thanksgiving, and I hope you are ready for winter because winter is coming, my friend.
Oh my gosh, and I am more than ready, and thank you so much for the kind introduction. But yeah, I'm wearing my coat, I am wearing my hat, I'm wearing my gloves. I am ready for winter to take over.
Yes, it's going to on Wednesday night, AEW Dynamite, Jon Moxley versus Kenny Omega, and we're going to get to that here in just a few minutes. But first, I did kind of tease some of the video stuff Andy's been doing, and one of the things he did was the Undertaker's 30 of the best moments for The Undertaker, and I had the pleasure to take part and help out in that, Andy, but that's been a big success, kind of looking back at the career of The Undertaker. Of course, he had his final farewell, quote unquote, there at Survivor Series, and a lot of people have been talking about that. What'd you think? Maybe how it was handled? I know there have been some different opinions on maybe what they did, but what did you think of just, I guess, I don't know if anticlimactic was the word, but I guess when you're doing a final farewell, there's not a whole lot to it, really.
Yeah, I didn't really know what to expect going into it. I know there was a lot of speculation from a lot of people thinking that perhaps the Fiend was gonna come out and interrupt the ceremony, try to enact one final angle for the Undertaker, but that wasn't so. We had a group of legends come out. 30 minutes worth of entrances, it seemed like, and then they disappeared as the Undertaker made his, like you said, quote unquote final appearance as the dead man. And you know, I wouldn't have made that 30 best moments over 30 years video for the Undertaker if I wasn't a massive fan. He's without a doubt on my Mount Rushmore, and even after maybe the mystique has kind of worn off a little bit the past handful of years or so, whenever he's on screen, I am always captivated. So even with the anticlimactic vibes that were going on at Survivor Series, I was still very attentive. It was it got emotional for me in some places, as it did for a lot of people, especially during that pallbearer hologram portion.
Yeah.
But it was also interesting because I was watching with my girlfriend, who is not a wrestling fan at all, and and it was interesting to see the moments of the ceremony that stood out for her rather than me, just get a casual fan's perspective. Like, she was really into the whole electricity, lightning playing his theme at the beginning. The hologram part was cool. So yeah, the theatrics of it. It really shows what grabs, I guess, more casual viewers and whatnot. What did you think of the whole situation?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I think everything you said, I mean, it was something that the presentation, obviously, you weren't going to get any better because it's WWE, and we always talk about that, just their presentation and what they're able to do. But, I think one of the things that stood out for me, and I don't knock WWE for this because I know we're in certainly a unique period of time, but man, you just think about how much different it would have been, doing something like this in front of a crowd, even if it's half a crowd, not even maybe full capacity, but even if it's, a half full arena or a half full stadium, something like that, I think it would have been much different. And also, I just think the piping in of the chants and such, like it just, I don't know, like I'm not saying again that it's their fault. I get why they did it, but it just makes it kind of, I don't know if it sort of just takes you out of it a little bit because there's no one there. And that's one of the things that maybe kind of stood out to me. But overall, I mean, again, it's something where, this was final farewell, I guess, for now. But as the Undertaker has said many, many times, you never say never, and especially never say never when Vince McMahon's your boss. So I think there's obviously, they could do something down the road. And I think you have to remember, too, they still have the Hall of Fame, and so they can obviously bring him back out in front of a crowd down the road and maybe get a similar situation. Obviously, it's not going to be the exact same, but there's still so much you can do with that once you do the Hall of Fame thing and then do all that. So I think that was sort of the biggest takeaway for me was that, man, this year, I just wish it was different circumstances, right? Because then we could have had a full crowd, and but I get why they did it now, given the history and the Survivor Series and all those other things. But that was the one thing I kept thinking about.
Right, and see, the thing with me is I guess I'm in such a pandemic mindset at this point that I wasn't really even reflecting on the past farewells and whatnot. But if you compare this up against like Ric Flair's farewell before he went off to TNA and ruined it a little bit. But if you if you look back at his farewell, just the emotionality there, the crowd response to the various legends coming out and paying him tribute, to the Undertaker coming out and paying him tribute, if we were to have this in front of a crowd, I don't doubt that it would have gone into the history books as one of those wonderful final farewell moments. But yeah, it's unfortunate that in a year like this, even the Undertaker gets robbed of a few treats.
When you went back and again, I thought about this because going back through all those moments, and of course, like I said, I did some of them. I did, I think, 5 for the video, and I just thought it was so fun to go back and look at some of those things that were like during that era. I mean, you and I have joked about the Phantom of the Opera mask before, and it was fun to kind of go back and watch a little bit of the stuff he did with that mask on. It's just so unique just to watch that, and then to look back at, of course, the match against Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania, the first one. Just looking back on all of that, was there anything to you? And obviously, there's so many different moments you can choose from, which is why you went with 30, because there really are probably even more than that at this point. But were there any ones that you kind of looked back and said, man, not necessarily forgot about it, but was there anything that you just kind of looked at and said, wow, I just forgot maybe just how great some of this stuff really was during those years?
See, what's interesting is that I actually didn't become like a big wrestling fan until around 2002, 2003 or so.
Yeah.
So going back to that Biker Taker era and reliving those moments, just reawakening early parts of my wrestling fandom was really interesting because it is such it's so odd because it is such a, I guess, controversial era of the Undertaker's career. Some people have extremely strong opinions, negative or positive, about the American Badass, about Big Evil and that whole era. I look back at it very fondly, just getting Taker to be able to flex different muscles as a performer and as a character. So going back to look at like the Brothers of Destruction, like their run in 2001, where we had Biker Taker and we were still in the final years of the monster Kane, still masked, was really, really fun seeing them just tear apart parts of the roster, just looking like absolute monsters. And then of course Taker's classic 2002 feud with a young Brock Lesnar, just seeing the seeds of storylines planted back in 2002 that would eventually pay off in like 2015, especially looking from their 2015 Hell in a Cell encounter back to their 2002 encounter, and just watching those matches back to back. It's really interesting just to see how their characters evolved, as well as how their relationship with each other as performers evolved as well. So yeah, that was all really, really fun. How about you? Was there a particular era that that caught your fancy?
Well, it was funny you mentioned the 2002. I keep going back to, and you mentioned the Brock thing, but I think about the other two, and that I remember the match against Jeff Hardy. That was just, it's one of those, like, again, it's one of those that kind of just always sticks out to you during that era when they had the ladder match with Jeff Hardy, and it was such a different type of match that they had for the Undisputed title. And then I think about the Royal Rumble with Maven, and one of the most unlikely scenarios ever. And I think a lot of people at that time thought, man, this is certainly, they're doing something here with Maven. Like, Maven could be this next guy. And look, I thought Maven was great on Tough Enough and all that, but boy, to have him eliminate The Undertaker. But I guess the point is, though, it's one of those that you remember, and obviously it didn't really lead to a whole lot other than The Undertaker just destroying Maven eventually, but it's a moment you don't forget, and whether you think about Maven's career overall or anything like that, it's certainly a moment that you will never forget, because I don't think anyone ever had or thought that we were going to see someone like Maven eliminate The Undertaker in the Royal Rumble.
Oh yeah, and speaking of that ladder match between Jeff Hardy and Taker, I was going back because one of the moments for 2008 that we picked ended up being Taker's feud with Edge. I
Yeah.
went back and I was watching Taker and Edge's TLC match, because we're currently working on another video counting down some of the greatest TLC moments, and you guys will be able to see that in December, right around TLC weekend. But yeah, I was going back and watching Taker versus Edge at I think it was One Night Stand 2008 or Extreme Rules. I don't remember if they switched over the name just yet. And gosh, Taker is so versatile as a performer, because that is one of the best TLC matches. I don't think it gets brought up very often, but it was in the midst of a wonderful storyline between Taker and Edge. We had Vicky Guerrero in there. We had the Edge heads and the Big Show showing up every now and then, and then Taker trying to overcome just like these massive numbers going against him. And gosh, what a performance! What a match! You don't expect a big man like Taker to be able to take the bumps and moves and those types of matches, but he always came through.
Yeah, he did, and that feud he had with Edge, I think over the years was one that was kind of, I don't know, sort of forgotten. I think in some of those underrated opponents he had, which on the previous episode of the podcast we talked about with Andrew Thompson. We talked about top 5 Undertaker opponents, and he was one that I didn't put on there, but I had a hard time leaving off because I think him and Edge had a pretty underrated feud overall. The WrestleMania match was great, but yeah, those two had great chemistry. But so the Undertaker had great chemistry with everyone, as we saw for the most part. Just so many great moments, and as we said, be sure to check out the video that Andy put together, and we'll have a link to it and such in the show notes, and it's already up on our YouTube channel there at the 411 Mania YouTube channel. You can find that just by searching for it. We'll have the link to it as well in the show notes if you want to reflect on some of the best moments there for the Dead Man. But we teased it earlier. Let's get to winter, because winter is coming, and AEW Dynamite probably set to have the most noteworthy main event match probably in the history of Dynamite thus far. And there have been a lot of big ones, but Jon Moxley defending the AEW World Title against Kenny Omega on Wednesday night's edition of Dynamite. And Andy, I guess before we get into the actual match, the build itself, what have you thought overall of the build? I think, for the most part, we knew when they announced this several weeks ago that it was going to take place on Dynamite. They announced it after Full Gear, and we kind of had the realization that, man, we're about to get this match here pretty soon. We're not waiting until Revolution, anything like that, because that's still several months down the road. What do you think just of the build overall? And I'm sure that will lead to us giving our theories on who indeed attacked Mr. Jon Moxley.
Well, the base of this feud, I mean, it's been embedded within AEW for months now. I mean, since Moxley and Omega's first encounter,
Yeah.
and we've had that question in the back of our mind. Yeah, this was a brutal match that they had. I believe it was last year's Full Gear
Yeah.
that they came one on one, right? Yeah, they had this monster of a match. It was brutal, but it wasn't a pure wrestling match. And of course, Jon Moxley would end up coming out on top. But we still had that in the back of our mind. What would happen if these two came into the ring again under Kenny Omega's terms? And the story leading up to this bout this upcoming Wednesday on Dynamite, they've really reinforced those parts of the story, especially with Kenny Omega's promos, constantly reminding us, yeah, that that lights out match that we had, it's off the books. It wasn't quote unquote real wrestling. And Jon Moxley, if you come in the ring against me and we stay in between these four corners, we stay in between these ropes, you don't have a chance. And it's really been interesting to see Kenny Omega's character build and turn throughout this feud because I'd argue that even though he was cocky, he was arrogant, he was very much of a tweener, even coming out of that match with Hangman Page. But he's really started to go all the way, especially with the promo that he gave on this past week's edition of Dynamite. Uh, with that amazing
Yes.
insult against Jon Moxley's father. But yeah, and then of course taking it into the next gear with Jon Moxley coming out and attacking Kenny Omega during his entrance during the contract signing part 2. Of course, he has suspicions that Kenny Omega is the one that attacked him. That remains to be seen, but nonetheless, the feud has been taken up to the next gear, and I am all in when it comes to this build. I am more than hyped for Wednesday night. I'm very, very excited.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, as you said, this has been building for a bit now, and we know kind of the backstory here and sort of that ultimate quest for Kenny Omega to get back on top and sort of prove himself, as he said in that promo he had last week, or that book. He's here to prove that he's back with the best of the best, and that obviously leads into this match. But I'm very curious about this whole, attacker storyline, and obviously, I think you do it knowing that there's probably a good chance that it's going to pay off during this match or after this match, because I feel like you don't plant that unless you sort of have an idea of where that's headed. And I don't think just, having Moxley come out, I feel like that's one of those sort of things where, the person who gets attacked is basically thinking, okay, well, I went and said this, Eddie Kingston, he's not the guy. I could look in his eyes and tell you it wasn't him. And so I'm just going to assume that it was Omega. But yet you don't get that clarity. You don't get that for sure, feeling one way or the other. And I feel like that's where we're headed here in terms of whoever it was. I just get a sense that we're going to know during this match or after this match. And Andy, I will ask you, because one of the theories that has been running wild on our favorite social media platform of choice, Twitter, is that this could very well be sort of this turning point, this spark, the beginning of a new era, if you will, in that a lot of people think that this could potentially be something involving KENTA, which would obviously lead to what we talked about several weeks ago on Dissecting Dynamite in terms of, is there the potential that Moxley loses his title and then goes to Japan to, defend the U.S. title there at Wrestle Kingdom in January? I think a lot of people are looking at this wondering if this is maybe this whole, everything's been built for this. So like this Game of Thrones style, you've got this invading something, and what if the invading is KENTA in terms of coming in, saying he's already going to come for Moxley, he said it before, and maybe this is the spot where he comes in, costs Moxley the title. If he doesn't cost him the title, he shows up, something like that. Let me just say this, percentage-wise, let's say you have to pick a percent chance that this could potentially happen, what would you put that at right now? Because I think it's an interesting question, because I can see why some people may think this is a possibility. KENTA lives in Orlando. He's back in Orlando now. A lot of ways it would work, but what do you think are the chances of this actually happening?
See, that's a tough one. But let's look at the breadcrumbs that have been laid out in front of us. Because Kenta, he's not my guy. He's not the prediction that I've said on Dissecting Dynamite, even though I have read that online. But here, if we're looking at it from the perspective of somebody that does think Kenta's coming in, let's look at the breadcrumbs. Uh, it's been reported that Tony Khan has big plans for winter, and that this show, this upcoming Wednesday at Dynamite, is set to kick off those plans. That's number one. Number two, of course, we have Kenta calling out Jon Moxley. He wants that U.S. title, and that's glaringly obvious. So that's number two. Number three, New Japan. It's under new management. We're looking at it and where those barriers were up before, with New Japan possibly working with AEW one-on-one. Maybe those barriers have been broken down, and that leads to a lot of speculation and a lot of excitement. If I'm going to give a percentage to it, I'm going to take a rule out of WWE's booking book. I'm going to say about 50-50 chance.
See, that's exactly what I wanted, because you bring up a good point there. And I just listened to it's funny, I was just listening earlier to the Kenny Omega interview that he did with Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez on the Wrestling Observer Radio. And, Omega was mentioning, and I don't want to say he flat out it almost sounded like well, let me say this. I think it was one of those things you could convince yourself into if you were listening to it. Like, if it's already in the back of your mind that, oh my gosh, this could possibly happen. If you listen to this interview, by the end of it, like me, I'm like, oh, this is definitely happening. Because throughout the entire interview, basically what he's saying when he's asked about these potential, working relationship with New Japan or anyone else for that matter, it's the similar to what Cody said about the bridges are down, but Kenny Omega really went into the actual specifics here in terms of saying, hey, he understands what the power structure was in New Japan before, the switch in terms of Harold May being out, and now there's new management. And now, what the possibilities are with that. And I think he even said, hey, this is something where I feel like that the wrestlers there are certainly open to it. And I feel like maybe there's a chance that they are being a little more open-minded now to this possibly being something we could do. And so I tell you, it's something that, again, which you and I, we've had our fun before with what happens when Twitter runs wild with Sting and all this other stuff. But at the same time, I can understand with this one, because logically you could connect a lot of these dots, because even Kenta's been the one who's been playing this up on Twitter. And I think sometimes when you see that happen, it's like, well, it's definitely not happening if you see someone playing this up so much and sort of out in the open like he has. But I do think that this is something that sooner rather than later we are going to see in terms of AEW working with New Japan. Again, I don't know when that is. And hey, look, maybe as we're saying this, maybe we're actually, going to see this happen within the next week. But I do feel like as much as it's been talked about, as many times as it's been brought up, and really, in some cases, it's not even that these guys are being asked these questions. In a lot of cases it is, but sometimes you're just hearing some of these guys bring it up in these interviews, kind of unprovoked. And so that makes me think, the wheels are turning. And I think if you're AEW, what's the benefit of working with New Japan? Some people may say, I don't know exactly what the extent would be for working with a New Japan versus, if you're working with Impact or NWA or some of these others. But obviously, it's very significant because, there is a crossover audience there with AEW and New Japan. Maybe not a huge one, but a lot of these people who watch New Japan know a lot of these guys from AEW because they were there. And I don't know, man. It's interesting to think about the possibilities, that's for sure.
See, and the thing is, Kenta also has that experience on American television too. So if you're picking somebody to come in and make that first introduction, New Japan into AEW television, arguably you can't pick someone better.
Yeah, that's very true. And I guess we'll see. We will see what happens with it, but that is one theory that people have. But as you said, you have talked about this on Dissecting Dynamite. You have another theory behind who the person was that actually attacked Jon Moxley there.
Oh yes, it may be controversial. I'm sorry, but I am Team Hangman.
Yes.
I want Hangman to be the one revealed to have been Jon Moxley's attacker. I just think it would add some fun layering to the story that has already been established between not only Moxley and Omega, but Omega and Hangman himself. And if you look at it from a storytelling perspective, he's in a dark place as shown with his interactions with the Dark Order. But but he's here and he's just suffered another major loss, and he sees his former tag team partner Kenny Omega about to grab that belt, about to get there. You know what? Number one, you can possibly you can possibly set that match up for disaster, make it so that match doesn't even occur. Or number two, you can ensure that Kenny's the one that walks away with the title, and then set yourself up for a match down the line with Omega, which is the payoff that I think everybody wants to see. So that's where I'm coming at it from. Whether or not it happens, neither of us know, and that's why you'll have to watch Dissecting Dynamite this upcoming Wednesday with guest host Blake Lovell.
Look at that. Mick Foley could not have done it any better in terms of the cheap plug there. We had to make sure we get that in. But yes, I will be joining you to discuss everything that happens on the Winter is Coming edition of AEW Dynamite. But that is an interesting theory, and I think the fact that they've added in this Dark Order thing has added sort of a new wrinkle to this that, I don't know, I just think it makes it more intriguing, not because I think that, Hangman's going to ultimately join the Dark Order. If he did, I mean, obviously I'd be all for it because that would mean my guy John Silver would probably get even more airtime, which he already is. I mean, he's a rocket. Like, this guy is, the rocket has been strapped to him, and he is on the way up. And maybe John Silver attacked Jon Moxley. I don't know. I could see it, potentially, but we'll see. All right, let's talk about just the match itself. Omega, Moxley, the outcome here, as we said, we've talked about some of the theories behind who could have attacked Moxley in the build-up to this. But as for the match itself, something else Kenny Omega talked about in that interview with Wrestling Observer Radio was, saying, hey, man, I don't know exactly how much time we're going to get. I don't know kind of what the breakdown's going to look like. For me, I'm always one that says, boy, any championship match you have, hopefully it's one that you can find a way to work in without doing the picture-in-picture, without a break. This match feels so big to the point to where I think I'd be a little disappointed if there was just a hard commercial break or even the picture-in-picture with this. I don't think you can do that. I feel like you just got to go all out here. And again, I don't know how long this match is going to be, but I do think just the logistics behind it are going to be very interesting. And we'll talk maybe a little bit about that before we get into picking our actual winner.
Yeah, the logistics are interesting because you look at it, and do we want to have a final winner here? Do we want to have a see? It's just very difficult to see because on one hand you could have a 60-minute draw, or you could have a dusty finish, or it's just so difficult to predict, especially with such versatile performers as Jon Moxley and Kenny Omega.
I don't know. Like I think it's one, and maybe that's what we're saying. Like when we talk about the build to this, maybe it's a good thing because I don't know which way they go here. Like, I mean, a lot of people are leaning towards this being something where, look, we think Omega maybe is going to win this title here, and I think a lot of people think that just based on the build, just based on the whole setup entering this thing. Because, like you said, what if it's a situation where, Paige is the one that attacks Moxley, Paige wants the title, and as you and I have talked about before, we eventually work our way towards, Hangman versus Omega, and we feel like maybe that's the next big match after Moxley and Omega. But I feel like that's where they go at some point. I don't know how quickly they get there, but then again, it's like, well, what if Moxley retains? Like, what is the scenario that plays out if Moxley retains the title? And that's one I haven't really thought a whole lot about, in that if he retains the title and beats Kenny Omega, then what? Like, where do you go from there? And I think that's very fascinating, but I do feel like overall the most fascinating scenario here is that Omega wins, and then even if Hangman's not the next guy, I think that opens up so many more possibilities because you're switching, from having the face as champion taking on a row of heels versus heel as champion taking on a row of faces. Like, it just, you're flipping the dynamic in terms of who's involved in the world title picture. So I will say that, like, I think the scenarios surrounding Moxley retaining are maybe not as intriguing at this point, just probably based on time and because he's had the title for so long at this point.
Well, with Moxley retaining, it would undoubtedly lead to just an extension of the feud that we have right now between Omega and Moxley. I feel like it's a foregone conclusion that eventually Kenny Omega is going to end this feud on top with the AEW title on his hands. If he doesn't, I feel a lot of fans may be disappointed in the outcome. But if Moxley does retain on this Winter is Coming edition of Dynamite, then it really, I feel like it just lights more of a fire underneath Omega, because his story leading into this whole situation is, I need to prove once more that I am the best in the world. I see Moxley's face on these billboards. My face should be up there. I see Moxley regarded as the best in the world by this by the PWI 500. I want to regain that position. So it really just lights more of a fire underneath him, and where he has been very cocky, very arrogant, Moxley's looking to slap that demeanor right out of Kenny Omega. And if Moxley is successful this upcoming Wednesday, I feel that may be what he does. But like you said, with Kenny Omega's character, that may not be the most interesting route to go, because the big difference in painting Kenny Omega versus Hangman Page and their long-term feud at this point is that Hangman Page has such a lack of confidence within himself as a performer that can get in there when the big title is on the line, when the big moment happens. Whereas Kenny Omega, he is that guy. He is the person that can get in there when all the pressure is on, and he can perform to best in the world standards. And if you give Kenny Omega a loss on this Wednesday, I don't know if he can retain that same level of confidence that would keep his feud in that dichotomy between he and Hangman as interesting as it is right now.
Yeah, I don't think there's any scenario where you feel like that Moxley can beat Omega clean with a pinfall that's going to do anything positive. I just think that's, and I don't want to say worst case scenario, but like, I feel like that limits your options on what you can do moving forward. So I don't see that being the case, because I just don't know where you would go from there, unless it's just Omega turning this character up 1,000 times to a level that we've never seen before. But I think the way to go is either just to have Omega win this match, and then just sort of, start afresh here with something new. And look, we're saying this whole Winter is Coming thing, like, this is there for a reason. I keep going back to this. Like, I feel like this is, otherwise you could just hype this as an episode of Dynamite. Like you said earlier, Andy, I mean, this is something Tony Khan has said, like, this is sort of a new starting point. So because you're saying that, and because you've hyped it up as much, with this big theatrical presentation here and this huge tagline that you're trying to use Game of Thrones style, like, this is something that you feel like there has to be a big payoff here. And we kind of laughed at Tony Khan, making these jokes about, we're doing all these surprises and everything, and people are saying, well, please don't hype all this stuff because it's just going to let everybody down. But I don't know, like, this feels like, again, whether it's the Kenta thing, whether it's something else, it feels like something big is happening here. And if that's as simple as a Kenny Omega winning the title, that's fine. If it's something bigger, even better. But it does. It feels like the stakes are very high here. And I think just using this tagline and setting it up the way they have, I feel like that almost guarantees that, like, something huge is going to happen in this match.
See, that's the thing, and hopefully that something huge doesn't end up being Shaquille O'Neal. But nonetheless, yeah, you're exactly right. A company with a multi-million-dollar television deal doesn't just go off and change their entire branding for a random episode of Dynamite. You look across AEW's Twitter right now. You look across the media that AEW is putting out, and a whole new look for the branding for this episode of Dynamite. That blue frozen over look, it looks so cool, so slick, but still, it's hyping up something big, and I'm excited to see what they have in store.
Yep, and you have to deliver. and learn from WCW. You have to deliver because if you're going to put on all this, if you're going to hype it up this way, you got to deliver with something special. And I think AEW is at least pointing in that direction. I think that they have something up their sleeve here, and we will see if we are correct when we get to the Winter is Coming edition of AEW Dynamite there on Wednesday night. But we'll talk more about that on Dissecting Dynamite, as Andy hyped there a little bit ago. We'll put the link to that where you can check it out each and every Wednesday after Dynamite. And, of course, come listen to us talk about it on Wednesday night after the special edition of Dynamite. But before we wrap up, Andy, we teased it earlier, you are working on something else video-related, and we have not announced this yet, but it is something that I was, had the privilege to be able to take part in, and I will tell you, it's one of the coolest things I think about just sort of wrestling out there and wrestling media and the different ideas that people work with and the different concepts. But this thing you put together, this sort of mini documentary here, this thing I think is going to be special. And so you can go ahead and make the big announcement on what it is and what people can expect from it here pretty soon.
Yeah, I've been working very, very hard on it, and 411 has been very, very gracious and not only their time, but the resources that they've allowed me to use. It's a mini documentary series called Squared Circle Spotlights, and we're going to be breaking down some of the most interesting moments in wrestling history that maybe haven't gotten the coverage that they deserve. And the very first episode is going to be a mini doc about Kurt Angle and his departure from WWE back in 2006 and appearing in TNA soon after. We have a lot of wonderful people involved. I was able to talk to Dave Meltzer, Brian Zane over at Wrestling with Regret. Was able to talk with Ross Tweedle over at Cultaholic. Chris Van Vliet, like you said yourself, as well as a variety of other wonderful writers here at 411 Mania, and I've put together what I think is a wonderful representation of what a lot of wrestling fans were feeling at that moment, because that's what we really want to do. Not only are we giving an explanation on this time period, we want to make sure that we really look into reactions around that time and really get to the emotional core of the moment, and we're doing so in this wonderful mini documentary feature, and it's turning out great.
Yeah, and you mentioned starting off with the Kurt Angle one, that's an interesting period in wrestling history. And like you said, there's a reason you're doing the series, because it's kind of one that doesn't necessarily get talked a lot about now. But back then, it was a huge deal to see someone like Kurt Angle going from WWE to TNA at the time, because this was a guy, as we said, and people talked about this so much. I feel like I've heard this, you've heard it over the years, but I feel like really in listening to a lot of interviews over the past, maybe, 6 months or so, that kind of go back and look back at the year 2000 in wrestling. Kurt Angle legitimately, he had one of the best years ever for anyone back in 2000. And I think to see the rise that he had then, and then to become sort of the major player that he became in the WWE just from that, and then turning that into much more after that year 2000, man, he just, what a decorated kind of star at that point to go to TNA. And I think, Andy, it was at that time where a lot of people were like, anytime anyone made the jump or someone left WWE and went to TNA, everyone thought this is the turning point. This is where TNA, everyone's just waiting and waiting and waiting for TNA to eventually overtake WWE. Of course, we saw that just has never happened. But at the same time, this was significant. And obviously, as we know, it was for a reason for Kurt Angle, because there were a lot of things going on behind the scenes, a lot of things going on in his personal life that sort of led to this jump for him from WWE to TNA.
Most definitely, and for a lot of people, it was one of the first incidents that opened them up to wrestling outside of the WWE. Kurt Angle was one of the flagship superstars at WWE in the time, and in bringing a whole level of exposure to TNA when he joins. Before there, I'm not discounting or discrediting the Dudley Boys or Christian Cage or Rhino or a variety of stars that crossed over beforehand. But when you see a name like Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle crossing over to TNA, that causes some ripples within the industry. But yeah, we're really digging into the reasonings behind his departure, the issues that he had personally, whether it be drug abuse, the painkillers, and everything there, but also the relationships that he had built with WWE and that unfortunately crumbled at that time. But yeah, it's going to be a very thorough piece, and it'll be coming out very shortly here. So make sure you guys keep your eyes peeled for that. Not only will that be featured on 411, but it looks like it's going to be featured on wrestling sites across that cover the industry everywhere. So it's a very, very exciting time here for the 411 Mania YouTube channel. So make sure that you guys subscribe.
Yep, check all that out, and as Andy said, we'll talk more about that on the podcast here, and of course we'll mention it once it's released. We'll put it up here on the podcast, links to it and all that good stuff, and let everybody know where they can find it. But as you said, Andy, you got a lot going on over on the 411 YouTube channel with Dissecting Dynamite. Of course, we just talked about the series you're doing there, the Undertaker moments. Go ahead. I know we've already pretty much plugged everything, haven't we? We've really done our full Mick Foley here in this conversation we've had for about 40 minutes. But anything else you want to plug, and you can let everybody know where they can find all your stuff there on Twitter as well.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm brand new to Twitter, just joined at the end of October, so I'm looking to flex my muscles in the game. So you can follow me over at Andy_P_Perez. Once again, Andy_P_Perez. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yep, check that out. We'll put the link to it in the show notes there, along with everything else. But Andy, always an enjoyable conversation. And as you said earlier, get your jacket, get your scarf, get everything you need for the invasion, because winter is coming, and it just may bring along KENTA with it, but we'll see. So we'll talk on Wednesday night's edition of Dissecting Dynamite. Thanks as always for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Thanks again to Andy Perez for joining us here on the podcast. And as mentioned, be sure to check out all the great stuff that Andy has been working on over at the 411 YouTube channel. We'll have the link to everything in the show notes. And as we talked about, we will soon be talking about this Kurt Angle mini documentary that will be coming out, and give you some more information on that, which, of course, you can find at 411mania.com. You'll be able to find all the specifics on that, and for any other videos that we put up there on the 411 YouTube channel. But for everything else, you can check out 411mania.com for all of our coverage from wrestling promotions across the world, as well as our live coverage of the weekly top shows. And we're talking about Raw, SmackDown, AEW Dynamite, Impact Wrestling, all those. So you can find all that at 411 Mania, and all the great columns and everything else that we have going on over there. Check it out at 411mania.com. And as I continue to mention, we will have the link to the GoFundMe for Larry Zonka's family in the show notes of this episode. So continue to share that if you can. And for everything else, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Any podcast app you use, you can find the 411 on Wrestling Podcast there. And you can also follow me on Twitter at WrestleBlake. Thanks as always for listening to this episode of the podcast. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you next time here on the 411 on Wrestling Podcast.